Righty. Today I wanted to talk about the desire for more. Okay. And let me just tell you, it's never going to be enough. It never is going to be enough. We all got like this sort of hole in us that we're constantly trying to fill. And it's just never going to be enough. I've seen many different examples of this where people would fill it with, people would fill it with anything. You have guys that would just like call over anyone to their place of peace and their place of solitude. Like any girl would just, hey, come on over, hey, come on, see me. Like people that you don't even like, you would just call them over just for the sake of not being alone and just really just running. And that's just that. Like you're always running from something. You're always running from the truth. You're always running from that hard conversation. You're always running from those thoughts lingering in the back of your head. Like maybe you're working out to run away from something. Maybe you're running away from that heartbreak situation where you just masked it over with weights in a facility, weights in a gym. But I'm telling you right now, you ain't gotta run any longer. There's a lot of people that have kind of like hit rock bottom, and they're thinking like it's all over. They're at the very bottom and it's all over. But let me tell you, the rock at the bottom is the Lord. The rock at the bottom is Jesus. I know not everyone believes in that stuff. I know not everyone wants to believe in that stuff. But I'm telling you right now, the rock at the bottom is Jesus. There's a quote in the book of Psalms by a man named King David. King David, he's crying out to the Lord. Okay, he's crying out to the Lord and he's saying, Lord, take me to the rock that is higher than I. Give me this purpose that is greater than me, that is greater than my own desires, that is bigger than me, bigger than everything around me. Lord, take me to the rock that is higher than I. And that's just that. The Lord is the rock at the bottom. Sometimes it takes reaching rock bottom, and other people can just have faith. But sometimes it just takes a hard turn in life. I got into lifting for a lot of selfish reasons. I got into lifting because it was just never enough. I got into lifting to mask a lot of certain situations in my life. I got into bodybuilding, and that worked out for a little bit. But then I really started getting into powerlifting. I got into powerlifting because it really felt great to move some heavy ass weights. It really felt good to vent out like the anger, frustration, and emotions that like me as a man, I didn't really know how to express those emotions. And I feel like I couldn't express those emotions. Like every time I did, it was just never taken seriously. And it's in the past though, but I think it's just important to talk about. It was just never taken seriously. And so I was like, okay, you know what? I'm getting like that double whammy, that double whammy where I can make some. I have a goal. For once in my life, and I can make something happen that I'm in control of and no one else can take away from me. So, first I started off with my deadlift progression. 225. I was like, holy crap, that's 225 pounds. That's like that's got to be like a fridge full of groceries or like something crazy like that. And then 225 became 315. 315 became 405. 405 became 500. And 500 eventually became 567. And that's where I stopped. And it's not, I didn't stop because, you know, I finally had enough. I stopped because I got this injury in my low back. And I couldn't progress any longer. It was straight out of like something from Thorfinn. You know, I don't know if any of you guys like watch Thorfinn, but Thorfinn is like destined to kill this dude Escalad that murdered his father. He's on the quest to avenge his father. His father was like someone who was like a man of his word. He was a great character, and his death was unjust. At the end of it, he ended up not getting the closure because someone else killed him before like Thorfinn's like the main character, before he could kill Escalad. And you know, that was just me. It was a lack of closure. And you know, going back to the Bible, I was like the Israelites wandering in the desert for 40 years until I finally figured out what I'm looking for. And let me tell you, you ain't got to look any longer. You know, there's this quote that I heard from a podcast. You know, you guys might have heard it. I think it's from Theo Von. You know, like there's like these two guys speaking, right? One guy says, like, man, lately I've just been looking for the Lord. Lately I've been seeking out the Lord. Lately I've been looking for the Lord. And the other goes, brother, the Lord ain't lost. The Lord ain't lost. I'm telling you right now, you ain't gotta show up to church in like a button-up t-shirt, a tux. If you're a woman, you ain't gotta show up to church in a sundress. You ain't gotta show up to church in a khakis, like whatever. So I'm telling you right now, God's trying to meet you with where you're at right now. Right now, God's trying to meet you with where you're at right here and right now. And you ain't got to wait any longer. You know, you ain't got to wait, because God's waiting for you. God's trying to meet you with where you're at in your circumstances right now. See if anyone's coming here. You know, God's trying to really resonate with you. You know, those deepest moments in your heart, those you know, the stuff that you might say to yourself, like, man, like, I'm taking that to my grave. Like, that's so embarrassing, or that's so godless what I just did. You know, I'm taking that to my grave. Let me tell you something. The Lord declares, all those who are weary and burdened, come unto me and I will give you rest. Right? He doesn't say, come to me when you have your stuff figured out. He doesn't say, come to me when you stop sinning in this way. He doesn't say, come to me when he doesn't say to show up to church perfect. You know, just like a hospital, you don't show up to a hospital because you're healthy and well. You show up to a hospital because you're sick and that you need help. You know, and the rock at the bottom is just that. You show up to the rock at the bottom. You show up to Jesus when you need help. You know, I'm telling you right now, you ain't got to wonder any longer. You ain't got to wonder. Maybe you're sitting late at night wondering, like, man, what am I on this earth for? You know, what am I here for? What is my purpose? I'm telling you right now, you ain't got to wonder any longer. You ain't got to wonder. Your purpose is God. You know, when Christ went up onto the cross, he said, it is finished. He said, it is done. He didn't say, you know, once you get baptized, it's finished. He didn't say, well, once you quit all this and that and the other, it is finished. He said, point blank period, it is finished. You know, I know that's a lot. I know it's very hard for people to really wrap their heads around. You know, I think it's in the book of John where it says, the light shineth through darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth it not. You know, this sort of grace and mercy and love is not known of this world, let alone like this generation. I'm telling you right now, you ain't got to keep wondering. You ain't got to keep wondering. Let me tell you something. When no one believed in you, God did. God did. When no one believed in you, God did. You know, when you didn't even believe in yourself, God did. Man, I swear, I feel like you guys just aren't hearing me right now. I feel like you guys aren't like listening to me right now. I feel like you guys are listening, but I feel like you guys just aren't like hearing me. Like God did. When no one else, God did. You know, when you didn't even believe in yourself, God did. You know, I'm just gonna keep on saying it. I'm gonna keep on saying it. And it might seem repetitive, it might seem mundane, it might seem boring. It might seem this, that, and the other, but I'm telling you right now, God did. And I'm gonna keep on saying it. I'm gonna keep on saying it until you guys believe me. Until you guys finally believe me, God did. You know, there's something poetic about that. Something poetic in the story of Christ that nothing else seems to come close to the truth. You know, Christ thought of you while on the cross. Christ thought of you when you made that horrible mistake, when you made that horrible sin, murder, rape, whatever it is. Christ still thought, man, I know there's a way. You know, when you were looking at yourself in the mirror and you were thinking like, man, who am I? I'm just such this unlovable creature. You know, I'm so ugly and horrendous in my sin. Man, I'm suffering so much. What is the purpose of this? Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something right here and right now. God did. Let me tell you something. God finds the love in the unlovable. God finds the beauty in the horrendous, in the ugly. God finds the thrill and excitement in the mundane. God finds meaning and purpose. God is everywhere. Yo, let me tell you something. What the world intended for evil, God intended for good. When no one believed in you, God did. Okay, let me tell you something. God did. All that we have is right now. Right here, right now. Let me tell you something. The Pharisees were talking with Jesus. I don't know exactly how it goes verbatim, but I know enough. The Pharisees are talking to Jesus. Jesus is saying that he's God. The Pharisees took that as insult. They said, how are you God? You're not even older than Abraham, let alone the Lord, let alone God. And he says, truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. Before Abraham was, I am. You know, I am the present. I am now. He's saying, I am everywhere. All we have is right now. All we have is Jesus. You know, going back to the desires, we all have like this sort of this hole in our heart that we're trying to fill. And you know, it can be filled with a number of things, you know, and it might even work for a moment. You know, for me, for about a year, it was alcohol. You know, me for many years, it was lifting. It was listening to music to kind of boost me in the gym in a way. You know, it was a number of things. Let me tell you, we all have that hole in our heart that's God-shaped. We have a hole in our heart that is in the perfect shape of God. You know, and we're all trying to fill it with a number of things. We're all trying to fill it with, you know, like it might be alcohol, it might be drugs, it might be a significant other. You know, it might be attention from your father, it might be attention from your mother. You might be thinking like, man, maybe if I just go to college, you know, maybe then I'll get the satisfaction from trying. You know, maybe I'll get the satisfaction from maybe I'll get the satisfaction from the approval of my father. There's a quote from this bodybuilder. His name's Sean Ray. Never won an Olympic title. Had phenomenal character though. Something that really stuck out to me. Something that he said was, if you give your heart, mind, and soul into something, win, lose, or draw, you'll get the satisfaction that you're looking for. Let me tell you something. You ain't got to keep seeking. You ain't got to keep wondering. You ain't got to keep seeking for validation from others. You ain't got to keep, like, it's good to have a goal. It's good to goal set. It's good to not stay complacent. But man, there's something different. You know, when you know, the gym community said obsession over passion. Let me tell you something. I took that to the utmost. I cut off everyone. I cut off some of the closest friends that let me stay at their own place. You know? And it's because I didn't believe in them. And more than anything, I didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe that I could be their friends. I didn't believe that they'd even liked me. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. But I'm just telling you right now. I'm telling you right now. I didn't believe. I didn't have faith. But I'm telling you right now, you ain't got to keep searching. You ain't got to keep filling that hole in your heart with worldly desires. You ain't got to be the greatest this. You ain't got to be the greatest that. You ain't got to get your ducks in a row before you're deserving of love. You know, you ain't got to do any of that. I'm telling you right now, God did. God did. When he went up on that cross, he said, "It is finished. It is finished." The loneliest man in history. You know, he was nicknamed a man of sorrows. When everyone turned their back on him, when the people even closest to him, that he really just gave his everything to, went up on that cross. And rightfully so, he said, "God, why do you forsaken me? You know, if there's another way in your will, please help me." He's crying out to God, the Father. At the end of it, he said, "It is done. It is finished." I'm telling you right now, you ain't got to keep wondering. You ain't got to keep wondering what your purpose is. Your purpose is with God. And you ain't got to show up to church in fancy attire. You ain't got to show up to church when you got your ducks in a row. Because God's trying to meet you with where you're at. God's trying to meet you with where you're at. And he doesn't want 90% of you. He doesn't want even 99% of you. He wants the full 100% authentic you. He wants the full 100% authentic you, not the one that puts on this mask and says like, "I'm happy this, I'm happy that." He wants you to pray to him about your deepest, darkest moments. He wants to be in that part of your heart. God already knows what happened. He just wants to talk it out with you. He just wants to talk it out with you. He just wants to let you know that you're not alone. All right. I think that's enough. All right. God bless.